The word bordel is French and not by accident. This invention originated there, and in translation, the name of this type of entertainment venue means small in the sense of tiny or insignificant. In the Far East, the Franks pronounced it as borda. The public houses of the kingdom were tiny. The Catholic kings could not stand open forms of prostitution, but the kingdom turned into a republic, as we have already hinted, before the modern era. Prostitution had a contradictory status, but it was the French Enlightenment thinkers who resolved the contradiction between faith and humanism. Therefore, in the first years of the 10th century, there were up to 200 brothels in Paris alone. In the last century, these establishments began to compete with each other. From a tiny house of entertainment, they often turned into palaces, but this was not enough to stand out among the others. Some arranged special rooms inside, stylized as exotic states, thus creating the illusion of travel, as Romanticism was at its peak in the first half of the 10th century. Ancient Egypt, China, tropical India, a guest could find themselves anywhere with their temporary lover. But it's not just about the interiors. Special exotic equipment was also provided for special guests, beds on which it was convenient to perform all sorts of acrobatics and Kama Sutra. But of course, this was only for the most expensive visitors, among whom were even princes. The 19th century is still called the beautiful era by prostitutes. They could sit naked on the windowsills of open windows, overlooking the main streets. One window, one night butterfly. By the way, the Dutch on the red light street adopted this practice. The priestesses of love stand in the windows, the everyday life of women in brothels. The police closed only illegal brothels. If the owner paid taxes and her establishment and workers met all the requirements, there were no problems with the authorities. By the way, about the authorities, the police kept a file on all prostitutes. There was no place for mystery in this business. Doctors examined the prostitutes for infectious and other diseases twice a month, and then even once a week. The only thing a prostitute could be punished for was ordinary offenses. Some butterflies aggressively accosted passers-by and were rude to those who refused their services. Sometimes they insulted a person in bed. Why was it the owner, not the owner, who managed the house of tolerance? According to one of the laws of France, only women could manage these establishments. They were called mamans, mothers, but a man could also live in the building if he was the legal husband of the owner. He performed the functions of a manager. Even an unmarried mother was not obliged to perform herself, although most of them had previously worked as such. Girls and women in separate, beautiful rooms only served visitors. They slept in one large, much more modest room, resembling a barracks. Their children could also live with them, but only the older ones. The little ones were not allowed. By the way, the establishment received a license if it had at least 2 workers. People in uniform, whether military police or even school children, were not allowed here. However, military personnel could enter these special rooms with a special permit. And during the First World War, soldiers and officers generally became the main clientele. Disgrace threatened an important client, and the courtesan who served him became influential and at the same time rich. Pricing and secret clients. There were different types of clients in brothels. For those with more money, a special range of services was provided. The natural aristocracy or wealthy entrepreneurs came to France from all over the world. Prostitution was legalized to such an extreme degree only here. Princes of European kingdoms, grand dukes, Eastern oligarchs, and so on. The pricing was quite logical. The lowest public houses in the hierarchy had prices that could be afforded by farmers, workers, and day laborers. But palaces like Leisha's bathhouse awaited only special guests, those who should have been an example to the people because they had royal blood. Many of them were already married. In general, you've guessed it, we're talking about secret clients. They paid hundreds of times more for 3 reasons. First, for special service. Second, for workers capable of special fantasies. And third, for silence. The main scandal related to such clients was the story of the womanizer Edward VI. By the way, the strange beds for sex mentioned above were made to order specifically for him. The mentioned aristocrat was the eldest son of the ruler of the largest empire in history, Britain's Victoria. She had a staff of people who tracked down scandals. This was a paradise for people from places where extramarital affairs were severely punished. But first and foremost, the French themselves loved brothels. Guy de Maupassant invented his best plots here, and the artist Toulouse-Lautrec did not leave the intrigue and scandals of the police. Or in the Islamic world, there was something similar in France. These people watched both high-ranking clients and the prostitutes who served them. Organized Catholic fanatics were scarier than the police. Therefore, many prostitutes even threw themselves out of the window, becoming victims of their persecution. It was the fighters against brothels who revealed the secrets of many intrigues here, making them public. Reporters from newspapers immediately pounced on these scandals. It turned out that you could take any politician out of the game if you paid someone from such a police force. It turned out that these saints loved money. So now we understand that the visitors, the politicians, became victims of ordinary corruption. They were blackmailed, and sometimes the mamans themselves set a price for their silence. Gradually, they became an unintended tool in the struggle for power. The loud investigations of those years were also connected with another shameful phenomenon. Often, underage girls ended up in brothels for whom they created, what kind of files, passports with an increased age. Thus, orphans ended up in court thanks to their guardians. And often, the institution of leisure spat on the law and decided to keep the little ones itself. The little ones were brought up with the idea that it is best to trade in love. And the loudest intrigue related to the beautiful era concerns the troubles that are characteristic of today as well. Among the prostitutes, there were often illegal immigrants for whom the establishment bought both a card and a certificate of a past medical commission. The place was considered so profitable that the work was finally of a different rank. The authorities of many cities became ashamed before the good residents and guests because naked backs or naked breasts of the workers hung invitingly from the windows of the houses of tolerance. The councils of communes began to insistently demand that the prostitutes cover up. In the second quarter of the century, a very old movement for the abolition of slavery gained particular strength. The fact is that after destroying open slavery, they turned to its closed forms and then reached prostitution. The abolitionists are sure that at the moment of serving the client, the position of a woman from a public house does not differ from the status of a slave. Further, more and more research appeared on the wave of confrontation with the brothel. Many politicians rolled out certain scholars to the authorities, wrote dissertations, and some journalists received recognition. It was in France that the struggle for women's rights intensified in 1920. In 1925, public houses were banned in some prefectures. As you have already guessed, the ones that were closed first were those where the clients had the rights of slave owners, and the women were slaves. And at this time, the spouses who owned the establishments could afford to live in palaces and castles. Later, there were fewer brothels. They became more modest, and their lives were even more strictly regulated by law.